Joining our discussion now by phone from California is Peter Shea. He's the president of the Center for Human Rights and Constitutional Law. Peter, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And you are also in the center of this story. You are part of this executive order, even though you're not mentioned by name, because the president's executive order does specifically cite the Flores case, which has been controlling the rules of how the federal government treats children in custody in cases like this. What is your interpretation of the president's executive order?
Well, I think, firstly, that the president says that Congress's failure to act and this 1997 Flores settlement that we reached with the federal government dealing with requiring the humane treatment of immigrant children in the federal custody, and it's a very detailed settlement, but at bottom it requires the humane treatment of immigrant children in federal custody, and it also requires their prompt release from custody unless, of course, they are a flight risk or they're a danger to themselves or others, or if they're detained with a mother or father and the mother or father does not wish the child, wants to keep the child with them in custody. That's really the bottom line of the Flores settlement. However, the president really for several months has been identifying both the failures of Congress and the Flores settlement for the children and their parents coming into the United States. He talks about a catch and release policy that doesn't even exist. And I think in this executive order today, he states that this Flores case puts the administration in the position, this is a quote from his order, in the position of separating alien families to effectively enforce the law. This is completely false. I mean, it's completely untrue. Neither Congress nor the Flores Settlement Agreement have ever required the separation of children from their parents. And this agreement has been in effect for 21 years, several administrations. No administration has ever interpreted this agreement. No court has ever interpreted this agreement to require the separation of parents from their children. So,
Peter Shea, can I ask you your reaction to one NYU law professor tonight has called this an unqualified retreat for the president. Do you see it that way?
You know, I think it's a qualified retreat. I wouldn't say that it's an unqualified retreat. I got a call from the Department of Justice today telling me that, pursuant to the instructions of the president, they intend to be in court possibly as soon as tomorrow in our case in order to request that the judge modify the agreement. And according to the conversation with the Department of Justice, they want to not only request, in essence, that parents can be detained with their children, which is kind of ridiculous because nothing in the settlement precludes that in the first place, but they also told me something that's not in the executive order, that they're also under instructions to try to modify the settlement, which currently says that any facility where minors are detained must be a licensed facility. And they want that part of the settlement stricken or modified so that they can start detaining parents with children in military-type facilities or other types of facilities that are not in any way licensed to ensure the safety and the well-being of children. So I think it is a retreat. I think it is a major retreat. But on the other hand, he simply cannot accept responsibility for a catastrophic and irrational decision to separate children in the first place. And instead, he blames Congress when they have no blame. He blames the settlement when the settlement has no blame. And even if he does retreat, there are several thousand children right now in this country separated from their parents with no effective plan by this administration how to reunite those children with their parents.
Peter Shea, let me just underline the news that you're making here tonight and your report on your conversation with the Justice Department. You're saying that the Justice Department, when it goes into court, where it will face you on the other side, on the Flores case to modify it, one of the modifications they want is that they will be able to put children in unlicensed facilities, and you indicated that those unlicensed facilities could be on military bases, which links up to one portion of the executive order. The Homeland Security Secretary, of course, is mentioned in the executive order, but surprisingly, the Secretary of Defense is the other cabinet member, along with the Attorney General, mentioned in this executive order. And in that part of the executive order, it says the Secretary of Defense shall take all legally available measures to provide, upon request, any existing facilities available for the housing and care of alien families, and shall construct such facilities if necessary and consistent with law. And your indications from the Justice Department is one of the reasons they want to be able to use military facilities for these children is that they can then escape the state and local licensing procedures that they might otherwise have to deal with.
Exactly. Under the Flores settlement, it not only calls for the humane treatment of children and for treatment that takes into account their unique vulnerabilities as children. It also very clearly says in some detail that if you are going to detain children beyond the short period of time that they're in Border Patrol custody early on after being apprehended, they have to be detained in a facility that is licensed, which basically means, in so many words, that the staff of that facility, the people that are running that facility, that they have training and they have guidelines that deal with the safety and the well-being and the psychological well-being and the health of the children being held in that facility. And what the call to me from the Department of Justice indicated today is that when they go into court, and they told me it could be as soon as tomorrow, that one of the things that they would like to have reversed or vacated from the Flores agreement is that requirement that children be held in licensed facilities. That could obviously have a very, very detrimental effect on the well-being, the health, and the safety of these children, whether they're detained with or without their parents.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.